In Part B of Chapter 3.2, we're going to continue looking at cell structures, focusing on the organelles that are inside of the cell. Because again, remember, to answer that question of whether supplements are important, we've got to understand the parts of the cell. So what you're looking at in your textbook here are an animal cell and a plant cell. So these are found on the bottom of page 59. And in the lab portion of this, we'll look at labeling these cells in class. So first off, let's start with the cell wall. So the job of the cell wall does the same thing that any other wall would do. It's there for protection. Now be mindful that not all cells have a cell wall. Only found in plants, fungi, and bacteria. Now, the cell wall is found outside of the plasma membrane. It maintains the shape of the cell and adds protection. We also know that it's composed of a certain type of sugar, a polysaccharide known as cellulose. Another organelle or subcellular structure we want to look at is the nucleus. Now, nucleus, remember, is only found in eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotes do not have them, but eukaryotes do. The nucleus contains chromatin, which eventually becomes chromosomes. That contains our DNA as well as proteins. We know that the nucleus is surrounded by a double layer that's called the nuclear envelope. It has holes in it called nuclear pores that allow materials to move in and out of the nucleus. And in the center of the nucleus, you would find something called the nucleolus. The job of the nucleolus is to synthesize or to make ribosomes, and again, it's found inside of the nucleus. So if you look at this image that's on page 60, you'll see here's that outer nuclear envelope. Contains holes or nuclear pores. In the center here, you'll see thread-like material called chromatin that contains the DNA and the proteins, and then in the center there, you'll see the nucleolus, which is what actually makes ribosomes. Some other subcellular structures that they mention on bottom of page 60 starts with the mitochondrion, also known as the mitochondria. You probably learned it as being called the powerhouse of the cell. And the reason it's called the powerhouse is because it produces the energy, or what we call the ATP, for the cell. In a further unit, we're going to look at a process called cellular respiration, which is the process that actually makes energy within the mitochondrion. We know that both animal cells and plant cells possess mitochondrion. Another structure we see is called the chloroplast. We know that chloroplast produces sugars like glucose through a process called photosynthesis. Now again, we know this happens in plants, not animal cells. We also know that chloroplasts contain a pigment called chlorophyll, which is what makes them green in color. Another subcellular structure or organelle is called a lysosome. Lysosomes, they contain digestive enzymes that have the job of breaking down materials and recycling them. They do so because they have a very, very low pH. That acidity is what helps them to digest materials. Some other subcellular structures that we see on page 61 include ribosomes. Ribosomes, we know, assemble proteins, or they build proteins. Ribosomes are made in the nucleolus. If you remember, that's found inside of the nucleus. And once they're made, they're found in two locations of the cell. Ribosomes can be found free-floating throughout the cytoplasm or attached to a region of the ER. So that poses the question, well, what is the ER? ER here stands for the endoplasmic reticulum. And there are two types of endoplasmic reticulum. You have rough ER and smooth ER. The rough ER is known as rough because it contains ribosomes. It gives it a rougher appearance. And because there's ribosomes attached to it, this network has the job of protein synthesis, building those proteins in those ribosomes. The other type of ER is called the smooth ER. It's called smooth here because it does not have ribosomes. It has more of a smooth appearance. And instead of building proteins, the smooth ER is involved in building lipids. Another organelle we see here is the Golgi apparatus. You may have also heard it referred to as the Golgi body or the Golgi complex, but our book calls it the Golgi apparatus. It's also known as the post office of the cell because it has the job of modifying, sorting, and packaging these proteins that were made in the rough ER. We also know that the cell has what we call centrioles, only found in animal cells, not found in plant cells here, and they move chromosomes during cell division. We'll talk in a further unit about a process called mitosis, and during mitosis, these centrioles help the chromosomes to move towards different sides. We also know that centrioles are used to form cilia as well as flagella, which we know are used for movement. Also within cells, you'll find cytoskeletal elements. So you think of a skeleton actually gives you framework. And so the cytoskeleton components give shape and give structural support. These include things like microtubules and microfilaments that play that role there. And then you have what we call vacuoles. Now, one specific type of vacuole is called a central vacuole. It's found in plant cells, and it has the job of storing water, storing starch, as well as storing those pigments that give plants their colors. Now, smaller vacuoles are found in animal cells. They function in storage as well, but the difference here being that the plants have the large central vacuole, whereas animals have a bunch of smaller vacuoles. So now that we've covered these cell structures, again we come back to this idea of supplements. Are supplements really beneficial? You know, we just talked about chloroplasts and the fact that chloroplasts contain chlorophyll that give them green pigment. Well, there's actually something on the market known as chlorophyll supplements, and the marketing behind them is that they energize, they detoxify, and they heal wounds. But there's actually no evidence to support that, because we know that human cells don't contain chlorophyll and they're able to do those same things. Another supplement that you may have heard of before, a lot of people that work out use, it's called creatine supplements. They mix it with milk or with water. And so what creatine is supposed to do is to increase muscle or to provide powerful bursts of energy. Now, we do know that our own cells use creatine phosphate in order to build ATP, in order to build energy. And so this is potentially a beneficial supplement to take. However, it's not been very well studied, and we do know that a side effect of this, if using too much creatine, it can actually lead to kidney failure. So are these supplements really that important? Well, again, we've got to look into a little bit more detail into this chapter, and I'm sorry that I skipped over that, but keep in mind there's still a lot of study that has to be done on these. So for this section, these are the objectives that we covered, and so just a really quick check: which organelle is found only in plants? Is it chloroplast, mitochondrion, lysosome, or Golgi apparatus? I would hope you would pick chloroplast.